Story 1. Home Alone.
I still remember that night clearly. Even though I'm an adult now, I was 12 years old back then, an age where being home alone felt exciting, like freedom, but also like a dangerous game I didn't yet understand. My parents left for the weekend and trusted my 18-year-old brother Zach to stay home with me. Less than an hour after they drove away, Zach told me he was going out to meet some friends. He said he'd only be gone for a few hours and told me not to tell our parents. I agreed. Part of me trusted him. The other part was thrilled by the idea of having the whole house to myself. At first, it was fun. I went downstairs, turned on a horror movie I was never allowed to watch. But halfway through, the fear stopped coming from the TV and started coming from the house itself. The wooden floors creaked. The wind brushed against the windows. The refrigerator hummed and clicked in the silence. Every sound made me glance toward the staircase, where the darkness felt thick, like something was waiting there. I shut off the TV and rushed upstairs, my heart pounding as if something was chasing me. I locked myself in my bedroom, brushed my teeth quickly, and climbed into bed. To distract myself, I turned on my Xbox and played until exhaustion finally pulled me into sleep. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I suddenly woke up. The house felt different. Then I heard it, the front door closing. "Zach's back," I whispered to myself, trying to calm my nerves. But the sounds that followed weren't right. There were no familiar footsteps heading straight upstairs. Instead, there were slow, wandering movements. Someone pacing, stopping, starting again. I crept to my window and looked outside. Zach's car wasn't there. My mouth went dry. I didn't have a cell phone. To call anyone, I would have had to leave my room, walk down the dark hallway, and go downstairs. Just thinking about it made my legs weak. I locked my bedroom door, even though I knew the lock was flimsy. Then, panicking, I squeezed myself into the small closet built into my room and pulled the door shut as quietly as I could. That's when my bedroom door opened. Someone walked in. Through a crack in the closet door, I saw a shadow moving across my room. Floorboards groaned with each step. Drawers were opened. Something heavy was dragged across the floor. I held my breath, pressing my hands over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Tears streamed down my face. Every second felt endless. I was convinced that if the closet door opened, I wouldn't survive. Eventually, the footsteps left my room. I stayed hidden, frozen in that closet, for what felt like hours. My muscles ached. My chest burned from breathing so shallowly. I didn't move until I heard Zach's voice echo through the house, irritated as he called my name. When he turned on the light and saw me crawl out of the closet, he yelled, asking what I was doing. Then we saw the rest of the house. Drawers were emptied, electronics were gone. The TV, the game console, everything valuable had vanished. When the police arrived, they confirmed it had been a burglary. Our parents came home just before dawn. My dad was furious. He slapped Zach for leaving me alone and not locking the door. No one yelled at me. But that night changed me. Because ever since then, whenever I hear footsteps in my house after midnight, I remember standing in the darkness of that tiny closet, holding my breath, and wondering what would have happened if I had made even the smallest sound. Ash Story 2, The Friendly Neighbor and the Kitchen Knife. I was too young to remember exactly how old I was when this happened. I hadn't even started kindergarten yet. I was small enough that I had to reach up just to grab the doorknob. At the time, I lived with my grandparents in a quiet little town where nothing ever seemed to go wrong. It was the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors during the day, and everyone knew everyone else. Our family had a neighbor named David. David was what adults like to call a good guy. He came over often to drink beer with my uncle, watch hockey and wrestling, help my grandfather with yard work, fix trucks, and even go hunting together. I saw him so frequently that his presence felt normal, comfortable even, like he was part of the family. I had always been told one simple rule: never open the door for strangers. But David wasn't a stranger. One evening, my grandmother went out to bingo. I had already called for her ride home. My grandfather told me he was going to pick her up and asked if I wanted to come along. I said no, I was watching cartoons and didn't want to leave. Before he walked out the door, he reminded me not to open it for anyone, then drove away. I stood at the window and watched his truck disappear down the road. The house went quiet. Only a few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I ran over and called out loudly, asking who it was. A familiar voice answered back. It was David. He said he had just seen my grandfather leave and wanted to come inside to wait. I told him my grandparents weren't home and that my uncle wasn't either. David calmly replied that he had just talked to my uncle on the phone and knew he was out drinking at a friend's place. Then he asked again if he could come in. I hesitated. I remembered what my grandfather said. But in my young mind, David wasn't a stranger. He was our neighbor. Someone I already knew. So I unlocked the door. David stood over me, towering and unsteady. He smelled strongly of alcohol. His eyes were unfocused, his words slightly slurred. He stepped inside and placed both hands firmly on my shoulders. I stepped backward, but he didn't let go. I told him he could wait in the kitchen while I went back to watching TV. That's when his tone changed. His voice dropped, filled with anger. I don't remember the exact words he said, only the fear that flooded my body the moment I heard them. He dragged me into the kitchen. David opened a drawer. The sound of silverware rattling echoed loudly in the silence. He pulled out a large kitchen knife. The blade caught the light as he pressed it against my stomach and asked if I wanted to be stabbed. When I started crying, he leaned close and whispered that if I screamed, he would cut my tongue or my throat. To prove he meant it, he dragged the dull side of the blade slowly across my neck. Then I heard a sound I will never forget. A car pulling into the driveway. Relief rushed through me, and I was about to scream for help, but David clamped his hand over my mouth just as the front door opened. My grandmother stepped inside. The smile on her face vanished instantly when she saw David holding me with a knife. She screamed for my grandfather. He came charging into the house, shouting in rage and shock. David shoved me to the floor. My grandmother grabbed me, holding me tight and shielding my eyes, telling me I was safe. I couldn't see what happened next, but I heard the struggle. I heard my grandfather yelling with a fury I had never heard before. Moments later, David was forced out the door. My grandfather shouted that if David ever came back, he wouldn't leave alive. No one called the police. After that night, David disappeared. He was never seen in town again. No one talked about him. It was as if he never existed. Years later, as an adult, I finally understood the most terrifying part of all. David hadn't acted on impulse. He had waited. He knew exactly when I would be alone, and the scariest thing wasn't the knife in his hand. It was realizing that the most dangerous people are sometimes the ones you trust the most. Story 3, The Friend Who Lost Control and the Knife in the Drawer. This happened during spring break when I was 15 years old. My parents were out of town, and I had the house all to myself for the night. At that age, being home alone felt like freedom. No rules, no noise, just me and the quiet hum of the house after dark. I was lying on my bed when my phone rang. It was a call from a guy at school I'll call Mason. We weren't particularly close, so it caught me off guard that he was calling at all. Before I could even say hello properly, he asked what I was doing. I told him nothing, just hanging out at home. That's when he asked if his friend Neil could stay at my place for the night. Neil was someone I'd known since elementary school. He was always loud, outgoing, the kind of guy who didn't care what anyone thought of him. But in the weeks leading up to that night, I'd heard things. My brother and some friends mentioned that Neil had started acting wrong, laughing randomly in silent classrooms, clapping out of nowhere, saying disturbing things about teachers being part of secret organizations trying to control him. I told Mason I didn't really want anyone over. I just wanted to be alone. Mason begged me. There was desperation in his voice. Real fear. Eventually, he offered me something stupid in exchange for letting Neil stay. I gave in. It was a careless decision, and I realized that too late. About 15 minutes later, Mason and Neil showed up at my door. I greeted them like any normal night. Mason handed me what he promised, then turned to leave. But before he did, he grabbed Neil by the shoulders and looked him dead in the eyes. His voice cracked as he said, "Please, don't do that thing. Don't do it." Neil just stared at him blankly and said he understood. Mason left. The moment the door closed, the house felt different. Neil turned to me and asked a question that sent a chill straight through my body. Are all the doors locked? I asked him why. He didn't answer. He just told me to check. Trying to stay calm, I walked him down the narrow hallway and showed him that the back door and laundry room door were locked. We stood there in silence for a few seconds. Then Neil slowly raised one hand, almost like he was asking a question, and smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was wide, tooth-filled, empty. I can still see it clearly in my mind. I forced a laugh to break the tension and suggested we grab some water. In the kitchen, I opened the fridge. That's when I noticed Neil standing by the silverware drawer. He slowly pulled it open. Inside were the knives. The metal glinted under the light. Without thinking, I lunged forward, grabbed his wrist before he could take one, and slammed the drawer shut. Neil didn't resist. He just stared at me, then chuckled softly, like it was all a joke. But my heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I had never felt fear like that before. The kind of fear that tells you your life is genuinely in danger. I knew I had to get him out of the house. I suggested we go to the park nearby. Neil agreed. We walked toward the laundry room that led outside. I let him step out first and told him I needed to grab my shoes. As soon as he was outside, I slammed the door shut and locked it. My hands were shaking as I called my brother and told him everything. Then I gathered every knife in the kitchen and brought them upstairs to my room. I wasn't thinking clearly, but I knew I couldn't let Neil back inside. My brother arrived with friends within minutes. They spoke to Neil outside. Neil rambled nonstop about conspiracy theories, about basketball coaches being part of secret cults, about people trying to kill him. Eventually, they took him home. Later, I learned the truth. Neil had been reading what he called a manifesto. He believed he needed to kill someone, or himself, to stop his father from killing him first. He had taken drugs that triggered a psychotic episode, activating schizophrenia he didn't know he had. That night, I came closer to dying than I ever realized. And the most terrifying part wasn't the knife in the drawer. It was knowing that if I had hesitated for even 1 second, I might not be here to tell this story. Story 4. The Shadow at the Window and the Man in My Bedroom. I was 10 years old when this happened. It was a warm afternoon, and my parents had stepped out to run errands. They told me they'd only be gone for a short while. At that age, being home alone during the day didn't feel scary. It felt like freedom. I was outside in the driveway, shooting basketballs at the hoop, letting the ball bounce loudly against the concrete. Every now and then, I glanced up at the house, a 2-story place with my bedroom window on the upper floor. That's when I saw it. A shadow. It was standing perfectly still behind my upstairs window. At first, I thought it was just the light playing tricks on me. Maybe a curtain moving, maybe my imagination. But then the shadow shifted slightly. Tall, human-shaped. My heart began to race. I dropped the ball and ran inside, locking the front door behind me. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I stood in the hallway listening, telling myself I was being stupid. Then I heard a voice. A man's voice. Confident, familiar somehow. "Brad, come upstairs," he said my name. Every muscle in my body froze. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I sprinted to the phone and called my mom, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I told her someone was in the house. She told me to lock myself in the bathroom and call the police. The police arrived quickly, searched the house from top to bottom, and found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No open windows. No one hiding. They told me I was probably imagining things. My parents believed them. That night, I went to bed feeling embarrassed, but uneasy. I kept replaying the voice in my head, the way it said my name like it knew me. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I didn't know why at first, just that something felt wrong. The room was dark, lit only by moonlight slipping through the curtains. And then I saw him. A man was standing beside my bed. He was tall, dressed in dark clothing, his face mostly hidden in shadow. I could see his outline clearly enough to know this wasn't a dream. He was real. He was breathing. And he was looking down at me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I screamed. The man reacted instantly. He turned, ran to my bedroom window, threw it open, and climbed out. I heard the sound of his shoes hitting the ground below. My parents rushed in. The police came back again. They searched the yard, the street, the nearby houses. They never found him. What terrified me most wasn't that a stranger had been in my room. It was the realization that he had been in my house long before that night. He knew my name. He had watched me playing basketball outside. He had waited inside while I ran around, while the police searched, while my parents dismissed my fear. And later, in the dead of night, he stood silently next to my bed, watching me sleep. To this day, I don't know who he was. I don't know how long he'd been there. But I know one thing for certain. The scariest part isn't being seen by someone hiding in the dark. It's knowing that someone was watching you. And choosing not to be seen at all.